Welcome back to Midnight Murmurs. Tonight, we return to Algernon Blackwood's The Listener. Some encounters leave no footprints, no names, and no explanation, only the quiet certainty that something has heard every word you've spoken. Dim the lights, settle into the silence, and listen carefully. Our story continues. The Listener Part 2 by Algernon Blackwood. November 10. I have done capital work, have finished the ponderous article, and had it accepted for the review, and another one ordered. I feel well and cheerful, and have had regular exercise and good sleep. No headaches, no nerves, no liver. Those pills the chemist recommended are wonderful. Even the gray-faced landlady rouses pity in me. I am sorry for her. So worn, so weary, so oddly put together, just like the building. She looks as if she had once suffered some shock of terror, and was momentarily dreading another. When I spoke to her today very gently about not putting the pens in the ashtray and the gloves on the bookshelf, she raised her faint eyes to mine for the first time, and said with the ghost of a smile, "I'll try and remember, sir." I felt inclined to pat her on the back and say, "Come, cheer up and be jolly. Life's not so bad after all." "Oh, I am much better." There's nothing like open air and success and good sleep. They build up as if by magic, the portions of the heart eaten down by despair and unsatisfied yearnings. Even to the cats, I feel friendly. When I came in at 11 o'clock tonight, they followed me to the door in a stream, and I stooped down to stroke the one nearest to me. Bah! The brute hissed and spat, and struck at me with her paws. The claw caught my hand, and drew blood in a thin line. The others danced sideways into the darkness, screeching as though I had done them an injury. I believe these cats really hate me. Perhaps they are only waiting to be reinforced. Then they will attack me. Ha ha. In spite of the momentary annoyance, this fancy sent me laughing upstairs to my room. The fire was out, and the room seemed unusually cold. As I groped my way over to the mantelpiece to find the matches, I realized all at once that there was another person standing beside me in the darkness. I could, of course, see nothing, but my fingers feeling along the ledge came into forcible contact with something that was at once withdrawn. It was cold and moist. I could have sworn it was somebody's hand. My flesh began to creep instantly. "Who's that?" I exclaimed in a loud voice. My voice dropped into the silence like a pebble into a deep well. There was no answer, but at the same moment I heard someone moving away from me across the room in the direction of the door. It was a confused sort of footstep, and the sound of garments brushing the furniture on the way. The same second my hand stumbled upon the matchbox, and I struck a light. I expected to see Mrs. Monson, or Emily, or perhaps the son who is something on an omnibus, but the flare of the gas jet illumined an empty room. There was not a sign of a person anywhere. I felt the hair stir upon my head, and instinctively I backed up against the wall, lest something should approach me from behind. I was distinctly alarmed, but the next minute I recovered myself. The door was open onto the landing, and I crossed the room, not without some inward trepidation, and went out. The light from the room fell upon the stairs, but there was no one to be seen anywhere, nor was there any sound on the creaking wooden staircase to indicate a departing creature. I was in the act of turning to go in again, when a sound overhead caught my ear. It was a very faint sound, not unlike the sigh of wind, yet it could not have been the wind, for the night was still as the grave. Though it was not repeated, I resolved to go upstairs and see for myself what it all meant. Two senses had been affected, touch and hearing, and I could not believe that I had been deceived. So, with a lighted candle, I went stealthily forth on my unpleasant journey into the upper regions of this queer little old house. On the first landing there was only one door, and it was locked. On the second there was also only one door, but when I turned the handle it opened. There came forth to meet me the chill, musty air that is characteristic of a long, unoccupied room. With it there came an indescribable odor. I use the adjective advisedly. Though very faint, diluted as it were, it was nevertheless an odor that made my gorge rise. I had never smelt anything like it before, and I cannot describe it. The room was small and square, close under the roof, with a sloping ceiling and 2 tiny windows. It was cold as the grave, without a shred of carpet or a stick of furniture. The icy atmosphere and the nameless odor combined to make the room abominable to me, and after lingering a moment to see that it contained no cupboards or corners into which a person might have crept for concealment, I made haste to shut the door and went downstairs again to bed. Evidently, I had been deceived after all as to the noise. In the night, I had a foolish but very vivid dream. I dreamed that the landlady and another person, dark and not properly visible, entered my room on all fours, followed by a horde of immense cats. They attacked me as I lay in bed and murdered me, and then dragged my body upstairs and deposited it on the floor of that cold little square room under the roof. November 11. Since my talk with Emily, the unfinished talk, I have hardly once set eyes on her. Mrs. Monson now attends wholly to my wants. As usual, she does everything exactly as I don't like it done. It is all too utterly trivial to mention, but it is exceedingly irritating. Like small doses of morphine often repeated, she has finally a cumulative effect. November 12. This morning I woke early and came into the front room to get a book, meaning to read in bed till it was time to get up. Emily was laying the fire. "Good morning," I said cheerfully. "Mind you make a good fire. It's very cold." The girl turned and showed me a startled face. It was not Emily at all. "Where's Emily?" I exclaimed. "You mean the girl as was ere before me? Has Emily left?" "I came on the 6th," she replied sullenly, "and she'd gone then. I got my book and went back to bed." Emily must have been sent away almost immediately after our conversation. This reflection kept coming between me and the printed page. I was glad when it was time to get up. Such prompt energy, such merciless decision, seemed to argue something of importance to somebody. November 13. The wound inflicted by the cat's claw has swollen, and causes me annoyance and some pain. It throbs and itches. I'm afraid my blood must be in poor condition, or it would have healed by now. I opened it with a penknife soaked in an antiseptic solution, and cleaned it thoroughly. I have heard unpleasant stories of the results of wounds inflicted by cats. November 14. In spite of the curious effect this house certainly exercises upon my nerves, I like it. It is lonely and deserted in the very heart of London, but it is also for that reason quiet to work in. I wonder why it is so cheap. Some people might be suspicious, but I did not even ask the reason. No answer is better than a lie. If only I could remove the cats from the outside and the rats from the inside. I feel that I shall grow accustomed more and more to its peculiarities and shall die here. Ah, that expression reads queerly and gives a wrong impression. I meant live and die here. I shall renew the lease from year to year till one of us crumbles to pieces. From present indications, the building will be the first to go. November 16. This morning, I woke to find my clothes scattered about the room, and a cane chair overturned beside the bed. My coat and waistcoat looked just as if they had been tried on by someone in the night. I had horribly vivid dreams too, in which someone covering his face with his hands kept coming close up to me, crying out as if in pain. Where can I find covering? Oh, who will clothe me? How silly, and yet it frightened me a little. It was so dreadfully real. It is now over a year since I last walked in my sleep and woke up with such a shock on the cold pavement of Earl's Court Road, where I then lived. I thought I was cured, but evidently not. This discovery has rather a disquieting effect upon me. Tonight I shall resort to the old trick of tying my toe to the bedpost. Thank you. November 17. Last night I was again troubled by most oppressive dreams. Someone seemed to be moving in the night up and down my room, sometimes passing into the front room, and then returning to stand beside the bed and stare intently down upon me. I was being watched by this person all night long. I never actually awoke, though I was often very near it. I suppose it was a nightmare from indigestion, for this morning I have one of my old vile headaches. Yet all my clothes lay about the floor when I awoke, where they had evidently been flung had I tossed them during the dark hours, and my trousers trailed over the step into the front room. Worse than this, though, I fancied I noticed about the room in the morning that strange fetid odor. Though very faint, its mere suggestion is foul and nauseating. What in the world can it be? I wonder. In future, I shall lock my door. I have accomplished a lot of good work during this past week, and have also managed to get regular exercise. I have felt well and in an equable state of mind. Only two things have occurred to disturb my equanimity. The first is trivial in itself, and no doubt to be easily explained. The upper window, where I saw the light on the night of November 4th, with the shadow of a large head and shoulder upon the blind, is one of the windows in the square room under the roof. In reality, it has no blind at all. Here is the other thing. I was coming home last night in a fresh fall of snow about 11 o'clock, my umbrella low down over my head. Halfway up the alley, where the snow was wholly untrodden, I saw a man's legs in front of me. The umbrella hid the rest of his figure, but on raising it I saw that he was tall and broad and was walking, as I was, towards the door of my house. He could not have been 4 feet ahead of me. I had thought the alley was empty when I entered it, but might of course been mistaken very easily. A sudden gust of wind compelled me to lower the umbrella, and when I raised it again, not half a minute later, there was no longer any man to be seen. With a few more steps, I reached the door. It was closed as usual. I then noticed with a sudden sensation of dismay that the surface of the freshly fallen snow was unbroken. My own footmarks were the only ones to be seen anywhere, and though I retraced my way to the point where I had first seen the man, I could find no slightest impression of any other boots. Feeling creepy and uncomfortable, I went upstairs and was glad to get into bed. On November 28, with the fastening of my bedroom door, the disturbances ceased. I am convinced that I walked in my sleep. Probably I untied my toe and then tied it up again. The fancied security of the locked door would alone have been enough to restore sleep to my troubled spirit and enable me to rest quietly. Last night, however, the annoyance was suddenly renewed in another and more aggressive form. I woke in the darkness with the impression that someone was standing outside my bedroom door listening. As I became more awake, the impression grew into positive knowledge. Though there was no appreciable sound of moving or breathing, I was so convinced of the propinquity of a listener that I crept out of bed and approached the door. As I did so, there came faintly from the next room the unmistakable sound of someone retreating stealthily across the floor. Yet, as I heard it, it was neither the tread of a man nor a regular footstep, but rather, it seemed to me, a confused sort of crawling, almost as of someone on his hands and knees. I unlocked the door in less than a second and passed quickly into the front room, and I could feel, as by the subtlest imaginable vibrations upon my nerves, that the spot I was standing in had just that instant been vacated. The listener had moved. He was now behind the other door, standing in the passage. Yet this door was also closed. I moved swiftly and as silently as possible across the floor and turned the handle. A cold rush of air met me from the passage and sent shiver after shiver down my back. There was no one in the doorway. There was no one on the little landing. There was no one moving down the staircase. Yet I had been so quick that this midnight listener could not be very far away, and I felt that if I persevered, I should eventually come face to face with him. And the courage that came so opportunely to overcome my nervousness and horror seemed born of the unwilling conviction that it was somehow necessary for my safety, as well as my sanity, that I should find this intruder and force his secret from him. For was it not the intent action of his mind upon my own, in concentrated listening, that had awakened me with such a vivid realization of his presence? Advancing across the narrow landing, I peered down into the well of the little house. There was nothing to be seen. No one was moving in the darkness. How cold the oilcloth was to my bare feet! I cannot say what it was that suddenly drew my eyes upward. I only know that, without apparent reason, I looked up and saw a person about halfway up the next turn of the stairs, leaning forward over the balustrade and staring straight into my face. It was a man. He appeared to be clinging to the rail rather than standing on the stairs. The gloom made it impossible to see much beyond the general outline, but the head and shoulders were seemingly enormous and stood sharply silhouetted against the skylight in the roof immediately above. The idea flashed into my brain in a moment that I was looking into the visage of something monstrous. The huge skull, the mane-like hair, the wide humped shoulders, suggested, in a way I did not pause to analyze, that which was scarcely human. And for some seconds, fascinated by horror, I returned the gaze and stared into the dark, inscrutable countenance above me, without knowing exactly where I was or what I was doing. Then I realized in quite a new way that I was face to face with the secret midnight listener, and I steeled myself as best I could for what was about to come. The source of the rash courage that came to me at this awful moment will ever be to me an inexplicable mystery. Though shivering with fear, and my forehead wet with an unholy dew, I resolved to advance. 20 questions leaped to my lips. What are you? What do you want? Why do you listen and watch? Why do you come into my room? But none of them found articulate utterance. I began forthwith to climb the stairs, and with the first signs of my advance he drew himself back into the shadows and began to move too. He retreated as swiftly as I advanced. I heard the sound of his crawling motion a few steps ahead of me, ever maintaining the same distance. When I reached the landing, he was halfway up the next flight, and when I was halfway up the next flight, he had already arrived at the top landing. And then I heard him open the door of the little square room under the roof and go in. Immediately, though the door did not close after him, the sound of his moving entirely ceased. At this moment, I longed for a light, or a stick, or any weapon whatsoever. But I had none of these things, and it was impossible to go back. So I marched steadily up the rest of the stairs, and in less than a minute found myself standing in the gloom, face to face with the door through which this creature had just entered. For a moment I hesitated. The door was about halfway open, and the listener was standing, evidently in his favorite attitude, just behind it, listening. To search through that dark room for him seemed hopeless. To enter the same small space where he was seemed horrible. The very idea filled me with loathing, and I almost decided to turn back. It is strange at such times how trivial things impinge on the consciousness with a shock as of something important and immense. Something, it might have been a beetle or a mouse, scuttled over the bare boards behind me. The door moved a quarter of an inch, closing. My decision came back with a sudden rush, as it were, and thrusting out a foot, I kicked the door so that it swung sharply back to its full extent, and permitted me to walk forward slowly into the aperture of profound blackness beyond. What a queer, soft sound my bare feet made on the boards! How the blood sang and buzzed in my head! I was inside. The darkness closed over me, hiding even the windows. I groped my way round the walls in a thorough search, but in order to prevent all possibility of the other's escape, I first of all closed the door. There we were, we two, shut in together between four walls, within a few feet of one another. But with what, with whom, was I thus momentarily imprisoned? A new light flashed suddenly over the affair with a swift, illuminating brilliance, and I knew I was a fool, an utter fool. I was wide awake, at last, and the horror was evaporating. My cursed nerves again, a dream, a nightmare, and the old result walking in my sleep. The figure was a dream figure. Many a time before had the actors in my dreams stood before me for some moments after I was awake. There was a chance match in my pajamas pocket, and I struck it on the wall. The room was utterly empty. It held not even a shadow. I went quickly down to bed, cursing my wretched nerves and my foolish, vivid dreams. But as soon as ever I was asleep again, the same uncouth figure of a man crept back to my bedside, and bending over me with his immense head close to my ear, whispered repeatedly in my dreams, "I want your body. I want its covering. I am waiting for it and listening always." Words scarcely less foolish than the dream. But I wonder what that queer odor was up in the square room. I noticed it again, and stronger than ever before, and it seemed to be also in my bedroom when I woke this morning. Why, November 29. Slowly, as moonbeams rise over a misty sea in June, the thought is entering my mind that my nerves and somnambulistic dreams do not adequately account for the influence this house exercises upon me. It holds me as with a fine, invisible net. I cannot escape if I would. It draws me, and it means to keep me. Why, November 30. The post this morning brought me a letter from Aidan, forwarded from my old rooms in Earl's Court. It was from Chapter, my former Trinity chum, who was on his way home from the East and asked for my address. I sent it to him at the hotel he mentioned to await arrival. As I have already said, my windows command a view of the alley, and I can see an arrival without difficulty. This morning, while I was busy writing, the sound of footsteps coming up the alley filled me with a sense of vague alarm that I could in no way account for. I went over to the window and saw a man standing below, waiting for the door to be opened. His shoulders were broad, his top hat glossy, and his overcoat fitted beautifully round the collar. All this I could see, but no more. Presently the door opened, and the shock to my nerves was unmistakable when I heard a man's voice ask, "Is Mr. still here?" mentioning my name. I could not catch the answer, but it could only have been in the affirmative, for the man entered the hall and the door shut to behind him. But I waited in vain for the sound of his steps on the stairs. There was no sound of any kind. It seemed to me so strange that I opened my door and looked out. No one was anywhere to be seen. I walked across the narrow landing and looked through the window that commands the whole length of the alley. There was no sign of a human being, coming or going. The lane was deserted. Then I deliberately walked downstairs into the kitchen and asked the gray-faced landlady if a gentleman had just that minute called for me. The answer, given with an odd, weary sort of smile, was, "No." You've been listening to The Listener, Part 2 on Midnight Murmurs. If tonight's tale left you questioning the silence around you, consider following the show for more classic tales of mystery and supernatural horror. Thank you for spending part of your night with me. Until next time, sleep lightly, and remember, sometimes the quiet is listening back.